A very warm good morning to everyone. It is my honor and privilege to introduce the inaugural panel comprising of eminent guests. I welcome Dr. Arvind Mayra, former Finance Secretary of India and Chairman, Access Development Services. A warm welcome to Mr. Biswajit Sen, editor of this year's State of India's Livelihoods Report. Mr. Sen is joining with us from the Livelihoods India Secretary. And it's a privilege to welcome Dr. G.R. Chintala, Chairman of National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. May I request all of you to stand for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता
On behalf of Access, it is my privilege to welcome you all to the 12th Livelihoods India Summit, being organized with Niti Aayog as the co-host. I now invite Dr. Arvind Mayaram to deliver the welcome address.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Access Development Services, it is my privilege to welcome Dr. Chintala, Chairman NABARD, to the virtual Livelihoods India Summit 2021. I also welcome Mr. Biswajit Sen, Editor for the State of India's Livelihoods Report 2021. A warm welcome to all our sponsors, partners, and delegates to the summit. This is the 12th year of the Livelihoods India Summit, and I'm proud that over the last decade, it has grown into an important annual forum to bring together diverse stakeholders engaged with livelihoods issues of the poor in India. The two-day summit delves into multitude of challenges that the poor face in enhancing the security of their livelihoods. Through dialogue, discussions, and debates in various sessions, the summit offers valuable recommendations. Across the 2 days, the policy environment is scanned, large livelihoods programs and their impact is examined, potential of institutions, both public and private, to impact the livelihood of the poor is assessed. Shifts in the environment and trends that advance and or impede the prospects of the poor are also analyzed. The summit provides an excellent platform for sharing of experiences of diverse stakeholders for cross-learning. Given the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in its many forms and severe slowdown of the economy over the last 2 years, the livelihoods across all cross sections of the population in the country have been hit hard. While India had made remarkable strides to end poverty, in recent years till 2019, the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic has slowed decades of progress to a great extent, impacting adversely, halting the pace of improvement in livelihoods, be it in farm, non-farm, or off-farm segments, thereby exacerbating the poverty situation. A significant addition of families to those already below the poverty line due to job loss, reverse migration, and slowdown in industry and services sectors is an added challenge before the country. Therefore, deliberations in almost all sessions by design or by default will have an underlying thread of impact of the pandemic in terms of the hardships faced by the communities due to loss of their livelihoods and, more importantly, strategies for responding to the crisis and building resilience for the future. The summit is so designed this year that in addition to plenary sessions and the technical sessions, they have been brought together into 6 thematic tracks. 2 tracks focus on the sector where the largest number of India's poor are employed, that is agriculture, and more specifically on farmer-producer organizations and agroecological transition in India. 2 other tracks are focused on poverty reduction through entrepreneurship. The 5th track explores the changing nature of jobs in the post-pandemic world. The 6th track looks beyond immediate recovery to pathways for building sustainable and resilient livelihoods. Deliberations in each track will be led by track anchors, followed by technical sessions. One of the very important plenaries right after the inaugural is themed on building back better, with a focus on investing in and enhancing vulnerable livelihoods. The second plenary will look at strategies for plotting the contours for 12 crore livelihoods in the coming decade. While we have an important fireside chat tomorrow themed Scaling Up Farmer Producer Companies, 2 other important sessions designed as fireside chats will be dedicated to the themes of reshaping of corporate social responsibility and green recovery. This mix of themes, we hope, will help understand and analyze the gaps in the ecosystem and underpin the root causes that need to be addressed to give the poor a chance to build resilient livelihoods. Over the last half a decade, promotion of FPOs as a strategy to make livelihoods of the small and marginal farmers viable has been heavily invested in by apex agencies like SFAC and NABARD, livelihoods missions, and international agencies. With a push through the centrally sponsored scheme for formation and promotion of 10,000 FPOs, there are now more than 15,000 FPOs registered in the country. Among these, several FPOs have started moving towards becoming viable businesses. 4 years ago, Access instituted the FPO Impact Awards, under which a few categories of FPOs will be felicitated at the awards event being held tomorrow evening in a physical format. I would like to thank NABARD, Rabobank Foundation, FWWB India, and Ananya for their support of this initiative. For several years, Access has been running an important sub-initiative under the banner of Sitaram Rao Livelihoods India Case Study Competition. Each year, around a topical theme, Access invites stakeholders to submit cases, and through a rigorous jury process, best cases are awarded and felicitated at the summit. The theme for this year's case study competition is Agro and Food Processing for Rural Advancement. While the 10 best cases have been brought together into a compendium, the 3 best case study authors will be felicitated at the awards event tomorrow. It has been more than a decade since Access first brought out the State of India's Livelihood reports. This report analyzes on a year-on-year basis the policy initiatives of the government, important and current issues in livelihoods promotion, 1 or 2 deep dive chapters on selected themes, and seeks to bind them all to proffer a few constructive conclusions on the new and emerging opportunities for the poor to move from subsistence to sustainable livelihoods. This year's report has been brought together by a clutch of eminent subject matter specialists. The principal objective of the Livelihoods India Summit is to build a constituency of stakeholders engaged in livelihoods promotion in the country towards envisioning an inclusive India. In this effort, Access is supported by a large number of stakeholders in many ways. While I'm grateful to stakeholders who have sponsored the summit, I'm also thankful to our technical partners and the group of advisors who have helped in putting together the summit sessions. My special thanks are to NABARD and Rabobank Foundation, who have not only supported the summit, but also its other sub-initiatives for the longest time. Access is extremely privileged with this association. Lastly, I also take this opportunity to congratulate the team at Access, led by the CEO Vipin Sharma, which has worked tirelessly to bring the summit together. I also welcome the 100+ speakers who will be speaking across the 2 days and thank them for their time and effort. Let me once again welcome you all to the 12th Livelihood India Summit and hope the 2 days and that the dialogue and discussions across the 26 sessions will be enriching and of value. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your welcome address and the brief introduction to this year's summit. We will now move on to the release of the State of India's Livelihood Report 2021 edition. The State of India's Livelihood Report is an annual publication addressing the contemporary issues emerging in the livelihood sector. It is the only document that aggregates the experiences and challenges of the sector, analyzes case studies and reports on the progress of both the government and the privately run programs. Given the diversity of themes that are covered in the State of India's Livelihoods Report, this year's report has been put together by a group of authors: Mr. Sen, Dr. Smita Premchandra, Deepika Bengali, Kasturi Sharma, Preeti Gulati, Soumya Premchandra, Bhav, Professor Gupta Pravin, Professor Annapurna Jyoti, N. Manjula, Shankar Venkateshwaran, and Dr. Ashok Sarkar. The report has been edited by Mr. Biswajit Sen. I am extremely grateful to our sponsors, NABARD, and our knowledge partner, Rabobank Foundation, who have been steadfast in their support to the report over the past few years. I now request Dr. Jia Chintala to release this year's State of India's Livelihoods Report. I also request Mr. Vipin Sharma, Mr. Biswajit Sen to unwrap their copies of the report for the release and hold up for a screenshot picture. You just put that, you know, content. Thank you. I now request Mr. Biswajit Sen to share key highlights from the State of India's Livelihoods Report 2021 on behalf of the authors.
State of India's livelihood report is brought out every year, and it really encompasses the year's developments in what is happening to livelihoods for majority of the people, particularly the poor in this country. This year's report has been a challenge because of COVID. Next. And the challenge has been for several reasons. Firstly, there's been an overriding impact of the COVID pandemic on livelihoods. Virtually, the pandemic maximum impact, other than the health aspect, is on the livelihood of people, both because of policies such as lockdowns, national level or local level, as well as the impact on families who have been directly or indirectly affected by COVID. The second challenge in this year's report was because of the COVID, the underlying parameters virtually change on a month-to-month basis. So when we look at the statistics, say in employment, regularly brought out now by Center for Monitoring Indian Economy and other institutions, show that it's shifting. So one month you might have a rise in employment, rise in GDP, but next month because of the impact, so even though we finalized the report a month back, a lot of the parameters seems to have changed again. Third aspect is that the COVID pandemic has brought out the need for defining livelihoods much more broadly than we have been using in the recent years, which is of employment or GDP growth. We have to go back to a much older definition of livelihoods that we use, which encompasses vulnerabilities, assets, capability.
Now I can talk.
The pandemic has obviously affected sectors very, very differently, different sectors, as mentioned by the chairman. And it's necessary then when we look at sectors to really look at those sectors which are large employers like tourism, transport, rural and urban, which is construction, which has been very badly affected by the pandemic, and where a large number of the poor people participate in employment. So overall, I think there's a need now again in the report as well as in livelihoods, and as mentioned by the chairperson, to refocus on poverty in the whole aspect. Coming to the definition of livelihoods, going back to the early 1980s definition, which was very comprehensive, livelihood comprises the capabilities, assets, and activities required for a means of living. Simple definition, but it also, to be sustainable, needs to cope and recover from stresses and shocks. And this has become very, very critical in the time of COVID. So who are the vulnerable populations whom we need to look at? Here, the report and the individual chapters and individual authors have focused on the vulnerable populations, particularly in each of the chapters. Firstly, there's a sectoral impact, as I mentioned. So tourism, travel, construction, transport, small retail, micro enterprises, where large majority of the poor are employed, migratory labor are employed, has been the worst affected. Then there's a phenomenal impact on gender. The women workforce has been impacted much more adversely during the COVID crisis. And this is brought out in detail in the second chapter of the soil report. Thirdly is the issue of migrant workers. We have all seen over the year what has happened, particularly in construction, small retail and manufacturing, and how there's been a reverse migration into the rural areas because of the lockdown in these sectors. And lastly, again brought out in chapter 2, the frontline workers in health, education, teachers, infrastructure in both private and public sector, especially in the rural areas. They were very adversely affected by the COVID population, and this is where the livelihoods have been directly and very badly impacted. If you look at the broad indicators, macro trends, as we call them, if you look at GDP, 5 years, there had been already a declining trend in our GDP. Declining trend in the growth rate of our GDP, not a declining GDP, declining trend in the growth rate. This spiked very drastically in 2020 when the first wave of the COVID hit. Only in recent months has the data been coming in where we are going back to the pre-COVID levels, but it's a long way from here to really going back to the high growth rates that the economy had shown much earlier years. So there are two reasons for this. One is that the impact of COVID hopefully will not be as drastic going forward. The second is also because policymakers have learned in the hard way the very high cost of universal national lockdown which happened in 2020, and now are much more policies are much more localized to really curb the impact of COVID and much more focus on containment rather than lockdowns. So there's been a tremendous learning by policymakers over the year, and I think this is going to play an important role in how we move forward. But there's a concern, and this is concern brought out by the Reserve Bank of India governor, who said that the lasting damage inflicted by the pandemic in these segments is of serious concern for inclusive growth. That is the key word, for inclusive growth. So we might have growth, but is it inclusive to take care of the poor in a large way? In the medium to long term, both efficiency and equity will greatly matter for sustainable development. If you look at trends in employment, which is the other major macro trend which livelihoods needs to consider. In September 2021, overall unemployment stands at 8.3%. Marginal difference between rural and urban areas, which is a much improved situation from 2020. However, the employment is a very complex issue. It's not simplistic and just a macro statistic, because what employment generation and structurally shifting economy is very, very critical. And different segments of the population get affected differentially in a structurally shifting economy. So some sectors are large employers, are declining and have been impacted very badly by COVID. But there are other sectors like the digital economy, which is the domestic delivery services, which is really growing. So we have to really, when we talk of employment, think of the structural shifts in the economy. The two dimensions I just want to mention in this, firstly is young people. India has 65% of its population below the age of 35, unique in the world. And that is the great population dividend that is, we are supposed to have. But in August 2021, as the CMI data shows, 32.32% of this population were not employed. So 1 in 3 young persons did not have employment in this country as recent as in August. And that's a social and some say political also is a time on which when we talk of livelihoods, we're talking of employment for millions and millions of. We're not talking about a small sector. Second is nuanced understanding of employment is required about jobs versus employment. The jobs is defined as the organized sector, formal sector. The history of growth in jobs in India has not been adequate to really take in a very large number of people, young people coming into the workforce. So there are limitations, and the informal sector, micro enterprises, etc., are actually the sectors which is going to provide the employment, and the impact of those sectors of COVID has really been very bad. So we have to look at the sectors in a structural shifting economy. We have to look at the future in terms of where the youth are going to be employed. And employment, even though if it grows overall, for a long-term strategy, we need to have a very nuanced approach to how we approach employment and livelihoods of the country. The third big question is about poverty, inequality, and livelihood. As mentioned, access has always been focused, interested, and the work has been on livelihoods for the poor. So we have to look at what has happened to livelihoods for the poor during this year and the impact of COVID on that. So traditional boundaries of analyzing data in the report, which looks only at micro trends of GDP, employment, is not adequate. Also, over time, the definition of poverty has changed, and there's a global multidimensional poverty index developed, which showed that India had really made very good progress for 10 years, lifting over 270 million people out of poverty. But what this pandemic has starkly brought it out, and the statistics show it, that the large number of such people were really just above the poverty line, on the borderline. And what the COVID pandemic and the impact that it has had on different sectors has done is it has put them back into poverty in very large numbers because they were on the borderline. And this is a very worrying issue which needs to be addressed in a focused and systematic manner. There's an excellent report on poverty and its spatial distribution across states brought out by Niti Aayog and UNDP, which looks at the what is called SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and what is the progress of different states in it, which really shows that poverty is very skewed still in India, and there's a need to focus on states which have very high incidence of poverty. Then Niti Aayog has also come up with aspirational districts, focus programs, where the poverty index is much higher. So again, when we look at poverty, we need to look at the geographical distribution, but it's become an overriding theme again in livelihoods because we have slid back because of the COVID-19 pandemic. What are the policies and programs? This is one of the important dimensions of every year's soil report to really update our readers with the policies and programs which have been introduced in the current year or which have been pursued more as a priority in the current year. They can be categorized in 3 categories. Those that impact livelihoods. First is the monetary and fiscal policies to kickstart or restart the economy and its growth, such as the sector-based PLI schemes, moratorium on loan payments for small industries, etc. The second is a set of safety net programs, really, like the MNRAG, free food distribution, which cushions the impact of COVID on the poor. And the last is that direct public health programs like healthcare and mass vaccination, which hopefully creates, contains the pandemic and hence affects the livelihoods positively. Again, the issue is of structurally shifting population and sectors into the urban areas. So we had the rural development policies for many years in this country, the time has come to really have an urban sector policy for urban development and growth. In the rural areas, last mile service delivery continues to be a problem, be it in health services, be it in economic services. And so, again, policies and programs universally, centrally determined are fine, but they have to be broken down into sectors, broken down into geographical locations, and focused on specific issues. Lastly, policies. It's always said that India is very good at policies, but delivery is the issue. And for that, institutions are what matters the most. So if all policies may be designed at the central level, but at the end of the day, they're implemented by institutions, government, corporate, and civil society institutions working on the ground. At the government level, specific to livelihoods, the report has also looked at the National Rural Livelihood Mission, National Skill Development Mission, and looked at the impact that COVID and the cushioning the NRIGs had in this country in this year. At the corporate level, there's an entire chapter where the CSI corporate response to the pandemic and livelihoods, in addition to the mainline business interests, is analyzed. The report has also looked at farmers producers organizations as a special area which can really create both livelihoods and build up institutions that can deliver a whole host of services to farmers and also other services to farmers' families who are residing in the rural areas. And there's a specific chapter dedicated to that. Lastly, development NGOs or civil society organization has been a facilitator of equitable development and a delivery mechanism for a large number of policy. And in many of the chapters, their contribution has also been looked at. So I just wanted to introduce the soil report. Hopefully everyone will enjoy reading it. These are the broad themes that covers. Last slide, I'll just look at the individual chapters and really the authors who have contributed to it. I've just written the overview, which really looks at some of the macro trends which we discussed in the first 2 or 3 slides. But there's a whole very good, well-researched chapter by Dr. Ashok Sarkar on livelihood policies during the COVID times, both at the central government level, at the state government level, as well as at different kinds of institutions, and what has been the efficacy. The chapter 2 in the report is on women working in the informal economy by Dr. Smita Premchandra, Deepika Pingali, and Anindrila Roy Chaudhary, which looks at women's issues, particularly in what I mentioned in the first slide on vulnerable populations, frontline workers like Anganwadi workers, health workers, women health workers, as well as in sectors such as construction. There's a chapter on sustainable agriculture of new methods such as organic farming adopted by some of the state governments, which looks at new strategies for growth in agriculture. There's a chapter on farmers, producers, companies, as I mentioned, where from quantity, how do you develop farmers, producer companies into qualitative impact at the farm and the farmer's family level by Dr. Richa Govil and Annapurna Neti. There's a specific chapter on future of jobs by Prabhat Love, which looks at emerging sectors which can contribute to job growth and employment growth, but also looks at the sectoral impact and what has happened to various sectors in terms of jobs and employment during the previous 5 years. And lastly, as I mentioned, there's a chapter on reshaping of CSR in the COVID times, that's from Shankar Venkateswara, which looks at both the ongoing policies of CSR which impact livelihoods and how they have been remodeled and shifted to manage livelihoods within the COVID context. So I'll stop here. This was to introduce you to the soil report. Hopefully, when you read it and you get in the various chapters, you'll find the depth that the authors have gone in and backed up. Most important, the report is backed up by a lot of evidence and statistical data, which hopefully will give it an authentic flair. So it's not just anecdotal, evidence-based, and that is, I think, an important part of the soil report. That how can we produce a report which to policymakers is backed by evidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Biswajit Sen, for helping bring the report together and for the insightful presentation. A big thank you to all the authors for their contribution in putting together this well-researched report. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for us to hear from our esteemed speakers of the inaugural session. I request the video message of Ms. Nadia Rashid, UNDP's Deputy Resident Representative in India, to be played for the virtual gathering.
Dear colleagues, a very good morning and warm welcome to everyone. I am honored to address the 2021 Livelihoods India Summit and extremely grateful to Access Development Services for hosting this important event. The evolution of this summit over the last decade is a testament to the strong commitment of the organizers and partner institutions to creating a better world, especially for underprivileged, vulnerable, and marginalized communities. Over the last 20 months, we have witnessed an unprecedented shock to economies, lives, and livelihoods. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating socioeconomic impact in India and around the world, and we recognize that this impact has been far more acute for vulnerable women, informal workers, and small entrepreneurs, along with many other marginalized groups. The pandemic has exacerbated existing inequalities and exposed development fault lines. Women, for example, not only suffered job and income losses at a greater rate than men, but also had to take on an increased burden of unpaid care work at home. The micro, small, and medium enterprises sector, which forms a backbone of the economy, has been one of the worst affected. Despite a momentum towards recovery, almost 40% of businesses continue to report a disruption to their operations. The effects of the pandemic jeopardize India's tremendous gains in reducing poverty and improving access to livelihoods and social protection over the last 2 decades. They also hinder our journey to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. For UNDP in India, one of our key priorities is supporting government-led and whole-of-society efforts to advance the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and to ensure that no one is left behind. This includes collaborating with government, civil society, and the private sector to economically empower women and youth and to enhance livelihood opportunities for vulnerable communities. We are also supporting small-scale entrepreneurs to address value chain disruptions resulting from the pandemic by improving their access to markets with a focus on channeling investments and promoting skilling for local jobs and local livelihoods. Through this support, thousands of farmers, artisans, and micro-entrepreneurs have been able to successfully create new sources of income through their own enterprises, benefiting from digital literacy trainings and support to build technical and managerial know-how. Already, 5,000 artisans have expanded their businesses through e-commerce platforms such as Amazon and Etsy. Another priority for UNDP is working with partners to promote green jobs and livelihoods, to help advance environmental goals alongside social inclusion and economic recovery, and to build resilience and sustainability for people and for planet. This approach is very much aligned to today's summit and theme. The theme, Build Back Better, Resilient and Sustainable, recognizes the unprecedented impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our societies, our economies, our lives, and our livelihoods. And it underscores the imperative of charting a socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable path to recovery, to regain development momentum, to build resilience against future shocks, and to strive to leave no one behind. I very much look forward to this week's deliberations and would like to thank Access Development Services once again for hosting this important summit and for providing a platform for critical dialogue, advocacy, knowledge sharing to help us advance together towards a resilient and sustainable path to recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nadia Rashid, for the insightful special address, touching upon the impact of the pandemic, especially on the economy and the most vulnerable segments in particular. I will now request Dr. G.R. Chintala to kindly deliver his keynote address.
Good morning to all, and it's a proud privilege to be here with all of you in this Access Livelihood Conference. First of all, I am extremely thankful to Sri Arvind Mayaramji, Sri Biswajit Senji, and Vipin Sharma, and also others who have given quite a lot of a message about really what exactly the conference is about and really how the livelihoods are getting impacted and what will be the future, really how these livelihoods have to be recouped because which have been lost. Actually, now these are the few things which are there in the minds of everyone, right from government to the institutions and to everyone. And I'm very happy with this soil report because when Biswajit Senji was giving the briefing, actually I was flipping through and it was very well written. And it's a departure from the previous reports. Actually, here this time I think we have concentrated on a very empirical, contemporary topic with a lot of empirical evidence as to really how the things have changed with this Black Swan event. So now, from NABARD's perspective, actually we have quite a lot to share. So that is why I just want to maybe put a time of around 20 minutes for my lecture, so that I should not exceed also. And would like to give what is the perspective of NABARD as an institution and also my personal perspective. Livelihoods actually definition was there for quite some time, and it is the 91, the same kind of, somebody should have a capability, skills, and also the assets to make a living, and this is the livelihood definition. And the sustainable is the one even to withstand the shocks and also coming back. These are the things, the sustainable livelihood, without pillaging the resources of the future. Actually, now this is the one which is a very important thing. So now that we are looking into this sustainable livelihoods in a very big way as an institution, and quite a lot of work done. Till recently was remarkable. Definitely I can say that substantial work has been done so far in the last 75 years. And when I look into the statistics, of the nation, actually somewhere immediately after independence or even 1950s, if you take, more than 85% of the people were depending on agriculture. Illiteracy was close to around 75%, and the per capita income was very low. Then the productivity levels of the enterprises were extremely low. Then the next one is with regard to the longevity of life. Actually, that time the average longevity was close to around 35, 36 years. So now these were all the things that time, and also that there was hardly any kind of a services industry worth the name and which could absorb quite a lot of people. And the manufacturing and other things were there. Though actually India was known for its cottage industries earlier, but most of them were maybe the self-employed kind of a thing without having any impact on creating the employment. But the paradigm had shifted and quite a lot of changes had happened in the last 50, 75 years. And particularly from the turn of millennium, actually the changes were very, very fast. Actually, that when some kind of a data was being looked into, actually I found that between 2004 to 2016, there was a tremendous migration of people from agriculture dependent laborers from agriculture to the non-farm kind of, particularly the construction and also the service sector. Subsequently, anyhow, that maybe a little bit of a thing had happened, and some people again have gone back to the villages. That is because of the black swan events that were there in the last 3-4 years. However, the way the entire maybe the spectrum, if you look into it, even today, almost close to around 50-55% of the people are dependent on agriculture for their livelihoods. And this is a very, very maybe significant thing which we have to look into it while thinking about creating the sustainable livelihoods for the nation as a whole. So that is where actually that I would like to concentrate a bit on it. And here, if you look into particularly the black swan event, the pandemic, which I think this book had covered very vividly, and we were the witness to the whole of this catastrophe that had happened in the last 1.5 years. And when we were looking at into the damage that had happened from the perspective of the institution, which I'm heading, actually, I could see that most of the people who are there in that off-farm sector, with a great effort, many of the people were shifted from agricultural dependency to the off-farm, non-farm and service sector. And they all were doing work in either the restaurants or maybe other service industry, construction and so many things. But in the last 20 months, actually, that most of these things have gone to a kind of abysmally low level of activity. Construction had virtually stopped for almost few months. And restaurants which were employing close to around 4.5 crores of people as in the service sector actually were closed for substantial part of the year. So most of the people have migrated back. And also even today, actually, that restaurants are not operating in the full swing the way they were operating earlier. So that now, if I look into it, that post-pandemic, though that most of the economic activity started returning to the normalcy, but still there are some kind of a dark patches with regard to the employment. And most of the people who lost the employment at one point of a time, I think they are still not in a position to get back to the same employment. So the livelihoods were grievously affected for most of the people. So now this is one thing which we may have to look into it as to really how we can create a kind of a livelihood strategy which will withstand such kind of a shocks. And even if something happens in this kind of event in future, the people should not be thrown out, and there should be some kind of a safety nets and the mechanisms to withstand such kind of a crisis. So that also has to be part of the strategy this conference has to think about. So now when I look into the broad areas, actually where the employment is there and the livelihoods are being created, as I told, actually if I look into it, there are around 4 or 5 broad areas which are really doing. So one is with regard to the agriculture. The next one is the services. The third one is the MSMEs or the manufacturing sector. And the fourth one, actually, we have something which is unclassified. Maybe the domestic works and few other things actually which could never come into any kind of thing. But at the same time, create substantial kind of an employment to the women particularly. And here I would like to give the personal experience of all of us, particularly which I used to see that earlier, before pandemic and during the pandemic, I used to walk on the road from BKC to Kurla, and I could hear the chatter of the people who used to have dreams, actually, that they all migrated from very small places to the city like Mumbai, and they got a livelihoods in some place here and there, and they had their dreams, but suddenly the pandemic had happened and the lockdown was unprecedented. Actually, it was unknown to everyone earlier. And people had to move lock, stock and barrel to their places. I could see that in one of the parking lots next to our house in the housing complex, almost close to around 200 to 300 auto rickshaws were kept like that for almost more than a year. Now imagine the people who are dependent on that auto rickshaw for their livelihood and who migrated. I don't know what kind of a repayments actually they were able to make and what kind of a livelihoods and for their living they were able to make back in their villages. So now these are the things I think which we have to look into it little more seriously when we are talking about the livelihoods. Then the next one is with regard to the efforts being made by various institutions and also the government to create such kind of a thing. Now actually this report, when I was flipping through, I found that quite a lot of things were written about Narega, then NRLM, and also the other thing with regard to the FPOs, with regard to other kind of an enterprises where the people are getting employed. And all these things are creating a substantial amount of employment and the livelihoods to the people. Now here, I want to specifically emphasize as to what exactly is the take on the agriculture, which is the biggest employer in the country even now. And also, if you look into the future, even in 2050 also, I think close to 45% of the people will still depend on agriculture. So now we have to create a robust kind of a mechanism to see that agriculture remains very viable and also that robust, so that with people dependent on that will have maybe the livelihoods continuously. So here the climate change, now many times actually many of us probably in this report, very little has been discussed about the climate change, but otherwise climate change is real, it's happening and it is affecting the entire production process in agriculture and also the allied sectors. Now, in many places, we ourselves have witnessed that most of the animals are giving the less amount of milk, and the incidence of diseases and pests have become much more, and the crop productivity is also coming down, and there is unprecedented rainfalls, or maybe the torrential rains are happening, and also the rains are happening even after the monsoon cessation has to happen. So that is creating again another kind of a drawback. So now all these things are bringing a new kind of a shift in our approach to the agriculture. So now the future livelihoods in agriculture will depend on how we are going to create a kind of a climate resilient technologies for agriculture. Because if 50% of the population have to be employed in that one, the core activity has to be sustainable, and that core activity sustainability will happen by coming out with strategies and technologies for climate resilient agriculture. So this is one area where many institutions are working. Government of India has got its own programs, and NABARD being the national implementation entity and also direct access entity of the various funds, we're also doing, and many other things are happening. So now this is one area. Climate change is going to alter our perception about not only the agriculture and also how the livelihoods are being created. At the same time, the climate change related kind of an activities are going to create a very good amount of an employment for many other people in the days to come and years to come. So many things are happening. Take the case of climate, like mitigation efforts. everybody is trying to shift to the maybe hydrogen cars or ethanol based cars or even the solar power, wind power. Now these sectors are creating a new employment opportunities, and so the livelihoods, as per the definition, the capabilities and also the assets. So now if that is the case, the capability is the new generation of the people who are going to enter the market. Actually, they should get that new technical skills to deal with such kind of a new areas rather than having the same kind of a world technical. So this is one area which this conference hope that will throw a light as to really how the new kind of a skill development programs have to be designed, and if possible they should be redesigned. Actually we have not taken this new perspective into account, so this also has to be done in a much faster way. The next one is that to create a kind of a resilience to the entire agriculture, we are doing quite a lot of work on the rural infra. Now that rural infra is the one which is the most important thing. So now NABARD since 97, that is in the last 27 years, NABARD had funded close to 4 trillion worth of infrastructure projects, which have created more than around 35 to 40 million hectares of irrigation sustainability, created roads, created marketing infrastructure and others. So now, if the activity per se, the agriculture has to be sustainable and long living, so that rural infra creation is the very important thing. And we are doing our level best in consultation with the Government of India and also Reserve Bank and everything. Actually, substantial work is being done on this one. And the other one is with regard to the Atmanirbhar package. If you really look into it, Honorable Prime Minister had a much better insight into really what exactly is going to happen once this pandemic ceases. So now that is why I say that Atmanirbhar package has been announced. And here, one very good thing is with regard to the Agri Infra Fund. Actually, 1 lakh crore worth of Agri Infra Fund has been announced. And already the work is in progress. And this is going to create sustainability to the core activity, that is agriculture, on which more than 50% of the people are still living and will continue to live. So now that is why that for the livelihood, this is a very, very important thing which we have to look into it. And I think in this report, I don't know whether they covered about infra. At least I could not see the chapter in this one, but otherwise, the substantial work being done, the rural infra is the one which is going to create sustainability for the livelihoods. Then the next one is the new thing, that is the sustainable development goals. That is all the 17 goals, actually they are intertwined and enmeshed into the work which we are all doing. And so that creating a better livelihoods is also one part of it, employment, hunger and other things. Now here, some new activities like WASH, water, sanitation and hygiene. This is one activity which was less talked about by everyone in the past, and now it gained a tremendous importance. Now if you look into it, that so many people are working on it, and the other day that some people were given even award also. So that time I could see that this is one area which is going to create a good employment opportunity for many people. Now this WASH is a big category which is going to employ quite a lot of people, right from production of the materials to the construction, maintenance like plumbing, so many other things are there. So now this is one area which is going to have a great impact on the health of the nation, health of the individuals, and at the same time create employment and livelihoods. So now NABARD has created a special refinance product, a concessional refinance product at 3%. And already quite a lot of a pickup is happening. So we are extremely happy that we are in tune with the changing times, and this is going to create a good amount of a thing. Then the next one is that livelihoods and the financial inclusion efforts have got a very big kind of a linkage. Actually, they are directly proportional. The financial inclusion efforts, the way things are happening, the way the convergence is happening with regard to the JAM, with regard to mobilizing funds from somewhere, whether it is crowdsourcing or from them other institutions, and at the same time delivering these funds to the ultimate man or woman at the ground through a seamless kind of a technology interventions. Actually, these are going to create a very big kind of a livelihood options. And already that this financial inclusion industry. Actually, I can say that has created so many jobs within that kind of a financial inclusion. And that if you look into any of the small MFI, which is having around 1,000 crores of business, it must be employing close to around 1,000 people. And now imagine these 1,000 people are delivering 1,000 crores, and the beneficiaries of them are creating the livelihoods not only for themselves but also for the other people also. So that is why this financial inclusion is the one which is one is a direct employment generator, and at the same time is going to create a very big and sustainable livelihoods to the population, particularly in the rural areas. So this is the one. Then the next one is with regard to the agriculture FPOs. I think a chapter has been written in this one regarding the FPOs and also the other constraints. Now, NABARD being maybe a conceptual leader and a leader who conceived this not only the project but rolled it out on the pilot basis, and also holding close to around 5,800 FPOs on its own, and also the implementing agency for the Government of India CSS scheme. Besides being the credit guarantee fund owner or maybe holder, I'm not saying the credit guarantee fund holder for these FPOs, we have a very maybe a great kind of a maybe I can say importance we are giving to this one. And also we have big hopes on this one because the FPOs are going to bring a big paradigm shift in the entire agricultural scenario. Now we are already witnessing that one. In the country as a whole, I think there are close to around 12 to 15,000 FPOs right now. And of this, at least half of them are having some kind of an activity in a much bigger way, maybe close from 1 crore to maybe 20 crores kind of an activity. Many of them are already getting the loans through the value chain financing or maybe some other kind of a thing. And these FPOs are creating so much of a maybe livelihoods to the people around. Earlier, the individual farmer who was clueless as to really what to produce, why to produce, how much to produce, and how much value to be added to that, and at the same time really how to market it. All those things were very big problems to him to even think of, because he was holding a land of around 1 acre or half acre and he did not have anything. But today, after these FPOs have come, in the collectivized effort and the way the FPOs are being given the direction, FPOs are being given the capabilities, FPOs governance standards are being set up, and also a lot of convergence is happening from the state governments to the central government and also the institutions. So now FPOs have become a very big kind of a new movement. And this new movement is creating wonders at the field level. We have seen that in NABARD, which is having around 5,700 FPOs, almost close to around 14-15 lakh farmers are connected to these FPOs. And some of the studies which we have done as a kind of interim studies to see really what is the efficacy of these FPOs, we found results were astounding, right from Punjab to Tamil Nadu or from northeast to west, if you just look into it. Many of the samples which we have seen, actually the farmers who are there in this one, they were very happy after coming to FPO with maybe they had some benefits in 3 or 4 categories. First thing is, they had now the latest information about the crop, about its marketability, and also the price realization, so that actually they are able to plan the crop even before the season arrives. So this is the first thing. Second thing is quite a lot of information flow is there from various agencies, right from ICR to agriculture universities and institutions. So that is why they are having the utmost technical kind of a brief. The third one is that they are getting quite a lot of concessions or discounts with regard to the inputs purchased. As they are all the people together, they are getting doing some kind of a bulk kind of a purchase with regard to the pesticides, fungicides, then the fertilizers and everything. So they are very happy with this kind of thing. The fourth one is with regard to the aggregation of their produce and somebody taking it to the next higher level, so that the value additions are happening there and they are getting the benefits. So now If you look into all those things, we found that the farmers on an average are getting close to around 25 to 60% of the benefit after coming into the FPOs. So now FPOs are going to be the new livelihood creators for the rural economy as a whole. And it's not only the employment, not only the livelihoods, but also the sustainability of the agriculture. It's going to happen. Then the last two things which I would like to tell is with regard to the new technologies that are coming in with regard to this livelihood space. One is with regard to the drones. Now the drones technology have become very popular, and a lot of experimentation is going on with regard to agriculture. And now you might have heard about Minister of Aviation had told that maybe there will be 6 lakh drones or so required. So now one is the manufacturing part, and second thing is employment at village level. Each drone will be owned by a villager, maybe a boy or a girl who has capability to drive it. And these are the people who are going to create the livelihoods to that. Then the next one is IoT in agriculture and also the other things. And also the startups, agriculture startups. So now that is a new kind of a kid on the block, and they are creating quite a lot of a buzz around. And we have quite a lot of things on this one. So now startups also, agri-incubation centers we are doing. And finally, that we have the skill orientation. Now this is the one which everyone has to look into it much more seriously, because there are so many people who are the established institutions, whether they are in a position to impart the latest skills, or they are up to the present generation's kind of a requirement. So this also we have to do. And finally, I will say it is the convergence. Now the convergence of all these efforts are required, right from the government institutions to the institutions like NABARD and also the civil society organizations. Everybody has to look into this aspect in a much more integrated way as to how the livelihoods can be created on a continuous basis, and those created livelihoods will be there on a sustainable basis, so that people will not be thrown back into the poverty again. So all the efforts which we have done to bring the people out of poverty sometimes will go to a knot as this kind of a black swan events happen. But at the same time, it is the duty of everyone to create such kind of a system so that everybody will have a decent livelihood, and the livelihood getting should be a right. Actually, that should be the kind of a thing which we should aim at. Thank you once again, and really it's a pleasure to deliver the keynote address. And as Chairman NABARD, we are very upbeat about the activities being taken up at the nation as a whole. And the institutions like NABARD, RBI, and the commercial banks, SFBs, civil society organizations, NBFCs, they are doing their level best to create the livelihoods to the people. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Chimpala, for bringing forth these sectoral insights and sharing your personal experience and talking about the State of India's Livelihoods Report. Your appreciation is extremely encouraging. With this, we come to the end of the inaugural of the 2-day summit. I take this opportunity to thank all the esteemed speakers of the panel. Once again, a warm welcome to everyone who has logged into the platform. I would like to mention that we have had an overwhelming response to the summit this year, with more than 1,600 registrations till yesterday evening. With the limitations of a virtual format, we've made all efforts to make this virtual event interesting. In addition to hosting the sessions, the virtual summit platform has diverse features for networking, exhibitors at the virtual knowledge booths and the resource center to download various reports and knowledge material into the delegate's briefcase. The 13th Livelihoods India report is now also available at the resource center for downloading. So here we are with a packed schedule of enriching deliberations on a diversity of issues related to livelihoods of the poor. I request you to please log into the virtual hall room 2 for the first plenary, Building Back Better, Pathways to Investing in and Enhancing vulnerable livelihoods. Thank you.